Hi guys, this is Bill with Media Unlocked, and I wanted to take a little time today to show you a lens that I've been playing with for the last month. Now, our friends at B&H, they were kind enough to send me the 90mm f2.8 L series macro tilt shift from Canon. Now, I've wanted to play with a tilt shift lens for a long time. Several of my friends have it and they use it to get some really interesting shots, and I wanted to play with it myself. So in addition to the 90mm tilt shift, they also sent me the R5 for the month, so I've been playing with that. But the problem is the R5 is a new mirrorless camera with an RF mount, and it's an old Canon glass, like all of my other glass, with the old EF mount. So I have to have an adapter. And right now I've got the Velo adapter for Canon. It mounts the Canon lens to the Canon camera and works really well. I had no problems with it, and I've been shooting with it for about a month. So kudos to this whole mess for working, because it works beautifully. So I wanted to explain how a tilt shift lens works and then show you the shots that I got with it. So a tilt shift lens it's an amazing piece of physics. It is large because it collects a much bigger circle of light than you need for your sensor, okay? It has this big overlap area because the lens has the ability to tilt and shift, hence the name. So it's got these knobs, and I'm going to try to do this so that you can see the way it works. This is the tilt shift lens. It's got 3 extra knobs on it that you don't expect. Now, a normal camera and a normal lens, they focus the focal plane of the lens and the focal plane of the camera must be parallel to each other, okay? That's the way it works. But because the tilt shift lens collects a much bigger circle of light, it has the ability to first tilt, which means that the focal plane of the lens can do this, or this. And by changing the front focal plane, you create a wedge-shaped depth of field. Your focal plane becomes not a plane, but a wedge shape. And that allows you to put different things into focus. You can manipulate your depth of field completely with this tilt function. It looks really cool. Now, I'm going to try to do this backwards. So I'm going to set this out here, but watch the end of the lens. This is the tilt function. It catches light at that angle and brings it back into your sensor. It also, of course, tilts the other way. Perfect, isn't it? By using that tilt function, you create that wedge-shaped depth of field, which gives you a completely different look to your images. Now, the shift function is just a little bit different. Notice that the lens, and I'm going to set this over here, is moving up and down on the camera. Now, this is really cool. I saw this demonstrated first off by Joel Grimes in one of his YouTube videos, where he would shoot a still life and then use the tilt shift to move the lens to capture the end and create a panorama still life that had no parallax issues. Parallax is a killer when you add when you're trying to do a panorama, and this just completely eliminates parallax. And yes, you can rotate the lens so that your tilt and your shift are in the opposite directions. Really a lot of fun to play with. Now, let me explain to you what this kind of looks like. I'm going to pop up a series of images that I have taken right now. It's the first things I did to try to explore this. Now, the computer keyboard that I have is a gaming keyboard. It's lit. And as you can see, I am focused on the letter L, okay? Now, I locked the focus of the camera in place. So all of these images, every one you're about to see, has the focal point set on the letter L. Now, the first thing I did was tilt the lens to the right and to the left. And if you take a look at these next two images, you'll see that the focal plane is a little wedge-shaped, and it's to the right of the letter L and to the left of the letter L. Yeah, isn't that kind of cool? Now remember, as you're looking at these, the camera is still focused on the letter L, but the letter L is completely out of focus in these images, and it changes that depth of field. So you can use this in a lot of different ways. It's really cool, and I'll demonstrate some of the images I took with it in a little bit. Now, focusing on the shift part, you'll notice that I moved my focal plane up in the rows of keyboards so that you've got a different focal plane, but the camera is still focused on the L. Now again, all of this is done, and I know a computer keyboard is boring, but by focusing on that letter L and not moving it, it gives you a really good feel for what this tilt-shift lens can do. Now, the images that I took on it, this particular tilt-shift lens is 90mm macro. It's not quite a true one-to-one representation for the macro, so, but it's great. It's used a lot for product photography and food photography, so it's a little bit of a niche lens. So, since it's really so good for food, I started off by shooting, what should I shoot? Maybe some food. Started off by shooting a vine of tomatoes that I had just purchased for my home. And I brought it into the studio, and I kind of tied it up onto a rack, and I just photographed it as a still life, just straight with the lens, and then using the shift version to create a wider image. I still cut it down, though, to a traditional size, but you can see that it does a huge job. And of course, I'm pairing it on the R5, so I've got 46 megapixels that I can play with. So I can crop this down as much as I want to and still have a bigger image than I get with my 5D Mark III. But the tomatoes came out perfectly. They tasted good too, which is kind of cool, because the best part about food photography is you get to eat your props afterwards. After I played with the tomatoes, I wanted to work on a pineapple, because it's pineapple season here and they're selling them in grocery stores for 87 cents a piece, and I just couldn't resist. So I went out and I got a few pineapples, and you'll notice that I cut a big wedge out of this one. And this one I wanted to shoot in that same style that Joel Grimes did in his video, just because I thought it was kind of cool. So I used the shift function. I shot it as a panorama. And then I did what he did in his video and changed the background out, worked in some textures, did a little Photoshop magic, and I think it came out exactly like what I intended to do with it. And it's a cool pineapple. I also shot this really great loaf of bread. Now, this was a loaf of bread that just came from the bakery, and I put it in a basket with a little napkin, but I used a combination of the tilt and the shift, because I wanted to create or see what it would look like if the angle of the shot, if the depth of field was truly on a diagonal. So if you notice on this particular shot, if you look at the left of it, the depth of, or the focal point of the camera is set kind of in the back along the ridge line of the bread. But then if you'll follow it down, the top, the ridge line of that bread is completely in focus, even though it's on a diagonal. I did not change the focus of the camera. I just set it up and then let the wedge shape effect of the tilt and shift do it on its own. And it came out just exactly like I thought it would. It's perfect. After that, I took a look at a flute. A friend of mine had a flute, and I shoot a lot of musical imagery just because I like it. I've always been around music my entire life. And I'm really, really proud of this one. It is, on its native size, almost 4 feet long. And again, this is using the shift function of the tilt shift. I set it up, I took the middle image, I shifted to the left, I shifted to the right, and then I put them together using the panorama blending mode in Photoshop. And it worked beautifully. I added a little bit of a background blur to it just to kind of fuzz the music just a little bit more. But I really love this shot. Really love the way it came out. I did the same thing with a wine glass and bottle. I wanted to shoot some white wine on a white background and on a black background. So I put it on the white background first, literally just put a softbox on one of my studio lights, put it right behind the wine and the glass, and shot it. Now, I'm not a big fan. I got to work on this one a little bit, but it was kind of interesting to shoot it. But the one I really like is this one on black. Now again, I'm using that shift function so it creates that panorama shape to it. But if you notice, I've got so much detail in my glassware and in the wine bottle that I managed to capture that time. I really like this shot a lot. Again, it's a very strange shape because we're not really used to the panoramas. But I love the way this lens works. As you can tell, the 90mm macro function of it makes it a really great image for, food photography or product photography. And well, you know me, I had to shoot a little bourbon, so yeah, there's one more bourbon image that I shot with it, and here it is. I really like this one because it gave me a chance to try to highlight both the signature on the label of the bottle and the portrait of Elmer T. Lee, one of Kentucky's greatest master distillers, that's on the back of the bottle. Yeah, it really worked out well, I think. So, again, this is used as kind of a niche lens for product photography and for food photography. It's a little bit pricey. It's a little bit pricey to be in everybody's bag because, again, it's a little bit of a niche lens. Now, the tilt shift lens comes in 2 other focal lengths, not just the 90 macro. And if you use the wide angle tilt shift, it's really great for architecture. So if you're shooting those big tall buildings, for example, you ever notice that the distortion of those buildings makes those leading lines of the corners of the buildings go towards each other in the shot? The tilt shift lens allows you to correct for that without having to do Photoshop manipulations, without having to use the distort feature of your transform command. It allows you to do it in camera. It's really cool. It also allows you to do something called the miniature effect, which is where you can go into a train station, for example, or an airport, and photograph the people looking like you're a long way away and shooting like a miniature set. It's really, really cool. So the moral of the story is, if you ever have a chance, play with a tilt shift lens. There are a lot of options out there. LensBaby puts out a very affordable tilt shift lens. It's hard to say that fast 3 times. Tilt shift lens. Canon puts one out. I'm sure Nikon puts one out, but, well, I don't shoot Nikon, so I never looked. But the moral of the story is this is a fun lens to play with. It gives you some really interesting features. So I would recommend you take a look at it. So thanks for paying attention. Take a look at a tilt shift lens, and I'll see you next time.
Let's go.